Dr. Bob, here's a crucial question. What was the source and content of vision of Isaiah, if the vision of Isaiah is the essential heart of the Christos myth, adopted by Paul, and preached to his flocks? The question is, where did the vision come from? It purports to be about the prophet Isaiah, as told by Hezekiah. From what cultural milieu does the vision come? More like the Qumran Dead Sea Scroll community, or the Alexandrian Jewish community, or somewhere else? And does the myth of this salvific archangel, that is an emanation of the high God, who comes to earth to allow himself to be sacrificed, passing through 7 heavens, landing on earth, going to Sheol, underground, before rising up back through the 7 heavens and returning to the side of the high God, does this have any older templates from other religions or from Judaism itself? This is a crucial question. It's the most important question that I think we could ask.
Well, I thought he was talking about Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah is meditating in the temple, and suddenly the veil is removed and he sees Yahweh Sabaoth enthroned with the seraphim orbiting him. But I guess he means the part of the book, the Ascension of Isaiah, that's called the Vision of Isaiah.
Right.
I've read that, but I'm not all that familiar with it, yet it certainly is part of the tradition of the Merkavah mysticism, the throne chariot of God, which they were already seeing in Qumran. I wouldn't see much Philonic in it. He had things to say about the Ark of the Covenant, which is the throne of God, but I don't know all of Philo. It's a massive bunch of writings, but I don't think he gets into that so much. But there are all these things going on for hundreds of years in Judaism where people zero in on the heavenly vision of Ezekiel, who sees this thing descending from the sky, the throne chariot of Yahweh, and the being sitting on it is made of translucent glowing jewels and so forth, and it's upheld by these creatures with wings and hooves and 4 faces each, which is kind of like the living creatures in the book of Revelation. That's where they got them, I'm sure. Revelation did. This appears to be another version of what you're seeing in Isaiah 6, Yahweh enthroned, surrounded by these weird angelic seraphs or cherubs. There were 2 different, like, chimera, hybrid creatures in the Near East. Like the cherubs were often pictured as winged bulls with human faces, or winged lions with human faces, for instance. You're seeing the throne of God, and you usually see it to gain a commission to do something for God. Isaiah sees it and is flabbergasted, and the voice of God comes out and says, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. And so sometimes they didn't have the commission, though Ezekiel did, and the various other ones where they see God and carry away some revelation. 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 10 describes Paul's vision to the 3rd heaven, where he sees the enthroned God or Christ, and he is attacked by a demon, an angel of Satan, who pummels him, and he calls for relief from Christ, whom he sees in the throne room implicitly 3 times, and finally gets an answer: my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That's kind of like he says earlier in the book, that we have this treasure in earthen vessels. We endure our suffering so people can see that it's not us that endures, it's the power of Christ in us. Well, that's the lesson he learned there. And the story says he came away with this from a visionary journey to heaven, the third heaven. And so that's the Merkava mysticism, and there are Jewish texts called the Hekalah texts that go on up into the 6th century CE or AD, where the same sort of thing happens, especially with Enoch. And the Ascension of Isaiah is based on this. It's like the Pauline thing in 2 Corinthians. It's a Christianized version of that. And it has the notion of the descent of the Redeemer hidden through the spheres. As he goes from one to the next, he assumes the mode of bodily existence prevalent in that sphere. And they had this belief, in some people still do, that we have 7 concentric bodies. One is flesh, but then there's the appetitive soul and various other ones. And they say ghosts are the appetitive soul, the part of you that just wants physical satisfaction and it can't get enough of earth, so it won't leave. And sort of like the Slimer in Ghostbusters, I guess. Anyway, so to hide his identity, the Redeemer assumes a body appropriate to each level until he gets down to the sublunar world of the earth. And when in Ephesians it says he descended to the depths, they don't mean hell, they mean the earth. And then he does his work and reascends. And at each level he sloughs off the body appropriate to it and goes back up as pure spirit. And this was all to evade the archons who didn't know what he was up to but would have tried to stop him if they did. And that seems to be referred to in 1 Corinthians, where the archons, among the mature, the perfect, the teleoi, we do preach wisdom, that we don't just preach to everybody. The archons of this age had no idea about this, because if they did, they never would have crucified the Lord of glory, of doxa in Greek, implying he's far beyond human flesh. Because they sealed their death warrant by crucifying him. They were playing right into his hands. And so he redeemed us, and those who understand the wisdom, those who can discern spiritual things because they have the Spirit. I mean, it's straight Gnosticism. Yeah. And they understand it. And so...
I find it fascinating. I want to mention, I don't want to throw you off.
No.
Preterism. Okay, the idea of full preterism that I talked about, like they gotta justify it. Well, how did this happen? If it did happen, resurrection can't be literal, even though there are very few out there that think, well, there was, you just didn't see them, number one. Mm-hmm. They got physically resurrected and they ascended and they were raptured.
That was Russell's view, wasn't it?
I'm not sure if Russell, but maybe there's a few today that think that. But there are groups of full preterists. They're part of the Church of Christ. They're part of different groups. And they're trying to explain when Jesus ascends on high, what did he do with his body, right? The hypostatic union and stuff. And one of them in a public debate with other Christians, it's like they're trying to gain validity to orthodoxy in some sense. They want entrance and acceptance to the mainstream Christian avenue. But nonetheless, he said, I don't know, he could have cast off his flesh. And I don't even think this guy's ever read Gnostic teachings or Gnosticism. He may have, but these guys reject that label. Like, they don't want to have any part of that. Because they do believe a literal Jesus literally came, literally died, literally resurrected it and such. They take the Orthodox angle on so much, but they think that it's possible. And now I don't know if he still holds this view. I'll leave his name unnamed here. But he cast off the flesh and then ends up at the right hand of the Father. Really weird that even crept in, because I knew orthodoxy argues the hypostatic union to the core. The flesh or his humanity and his divinity never separate, according to the Orthodox Church. He's still a man seated at the right hand of God somewhere.
But in a pneumatic or spiritual body.
Right. What is that? I don't know. They think it's literal flesh. The same body I guess it's a body that has holes in it still. That's how far the Orthodox likes to go. Grab my hand or feel my side, and it's got to be that kind of body. So you argue with them, what's the resurrection? Well, you're going to resurrect the same way Jesus did, and if you had a scar on your left butt cheek from when you were a kid and a dog bit you, you're going to probably have a dog bite for the rest of eternity in your new body.
Well, how about in the Gospels, where it's better to enter into heaven, into life maimed, than to be physically sound and thrown into the Gehenna of fire? That certainly seems to imply
like a new body part when you go to hell.
Oh no! The same. I mean, if your right hand offends you, cut it off, because that may land you in damnation. Don't take that chance. Be severe on yourself, because that way at least you'll go to heaven.
Right.
If you say, I don't think I'm going to risk that, and I'll be okay. Well, you might be, but I wouldn't chance it. So
you rabbit trailed into some really good stuff there with the Ascension of Isaiah, and I think he is talking about the actual Ascension of Isaiah, not the Isaiah chapter 6 concept. But I think Richard Carrier, Dr. Carrier, mentions this often in his discussions on the Ascension of Isaiah, and he mentioned this On the Historicity in his book, and how prevalent this is, but that there may have been a later addition in the book itself, the Ascension of Isaiah, not Isaiah the book. I hope that didn't confuse whoever's listening. But that there may have been later additions in the book trying to orthodoxy, if you will, or try to tame this Gnostic, strange mystery school type of teachings here. But he thinks, and the question that is being asked by our friend Jasper Sky is ultimately coming down to, did Paul's Christ figure, which is angelic technically in a sense, is it descends and then ascends idea, is it coming from this, or is it very similar in nature to the vision of Isaiah?
Well, it is. That First Corinthians thing about the archons of this age,
right?
That seems like just sort of a thumbnail sketch of the longer version of it in the Ascension of Isaiah. And also you might think of the hymn of the pearl, that is a Gnostic thing that's been set into the Acts of Thomas, where the Gnostic revealer is sent into the world, but becomes dazzled by all of the temptations of the flesh, and it's like the prodigal son. He loses track of who he is and why he's there, but then he hears the call. That the message is sent to him that wakes him up, like the prodigal. He comes to his senses and says, what am I doing here? I don't have to live like this. And so he then goes back, he says what he has to say, and then reascends to the pleroma, and it said he stripped off the garment of the flesh in order to ascend. It's the same myth again. So that is Gnostic, and again, there are overlaps between all these groups, because the Ascension of Isaiah could be understood as a Jewish Christian work. But then a lot of Gnostic apocalypses were supposedly the vision of Adam or Seth or Shem or Melchizedek or whatever, so that they can have a lot to do with each other. Carrier also is very good in dealing with what the heck the spiritual body is supposed to be in 1 Corinthians 15. Is it a transformation, or doesn't some of the language suggest you slough off the husk of the physical body and you have a pneumatic body?
Right.
Oh, yeah. And some of the language indicating that, well, this mortal must put on immortality. That's actually quite consistent. But I think he makes a very good case that that's what 1 Corinthians 15 means, and it does imply casting off the flesh, which would mean whoever thought this didn't think in terms of an empty tomb narrative.
So this brings up an interesting point, because I find conflicts of interest overall when I see how you're viewing Pauline epistles and he does. But I guess my question is when someone leaves this canon that's been compiled, how do they pass stuff like 1 Corinthians 15 and not go, we got to make sure that this is a physical resurrection of the saints, that this is not just a spiritual body? Was it not that much of a conflict at the time, you think? Or do you think that it still fit their picture? Or does it still fit the picture in a sense? You just have to really read into it and realize some of the stuff we're seeing today and going, hey, that's so Gnostic that it's obvious they're not talking about the same fleshly body that you're going to ascend in. See, Carrier might say, hey, the Gospels come much later. It's obvious they're attaching physical flesh to the idea of resurrection, whereas you would say, hey, we don't know which came first necessarily. I mean, there's so much, the waters are so muddy, you can't say 1 Corinthians 15 came before the Gospel of John's narrative of, fill my hands, Thomas, fill my side. So I guess I'm asking, how do you look at 1 Corinthians 15 if another guy who's somewhat, I'll hate to use the term, proto-orthodoxy, is looking and going, this isn't talking about the same body, though. This is a spiritual body. Did they not have a problem with it, you think? They saw it and said, hey, we got to have our Marcionites still see something here? Or was that in the creed, like you said in 1 Corinthians 15? It's a creed, or an early creed, maybe. How do you answer that? You know what I mean?
Well, as Talbert says in Luke and the Gnostics, that it sure looks like Luke is using the same apologetic agenda that the second century apologists used. And that's why you have this thing, look, no spirit has flesh and bone as you see that I have. Why is that in there? Well, it's to counteract the spiritual body version of the Gnostics. Similarly, Tertullian fights over what sort of a body it is, and he says it's a body of flesh. And in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in the resurrection, doesn't say of the body, but of the flesh. So they're trying to get away from that spiritualism that negated physicality. I mean, it was sort of part of a wider agenda, and I'd say the Orthodox had the less neurotic view of it, because if you discount the body, you're going to abuse the body. It's asceticism and all that.
Didn't Martin Luther do that?
No, he kind of got back into the good things of the creation.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I remember him when he was monk-like and he was a priest. He would pretty much treat us by, they wore like sack-like clothing, and he would go out in the cold and just didn't give a crap about his physical body.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of figured that plays asceticism, that kind of concept there, but...
Well, no, that's right. He thought that he had to be righteous for God to accept him. Then he's preparing notes for a lecture on Romans, and he says that the God gives what he requires, the righteousness that comes from God, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. God doesn't require it. He supplies it through faith, and so that was it for monasticism. He went out and got married. He became a very worldly, balanced guy in many ways. He had rather nasty aspects. He was a vicious anti-Semite, and so forth. But in some ways, he was healthier than he had been before. So that was kind of the Tertullian view too. Though Tertullian eventually joined the Montanist sect, which was very rigorous, though not Gnostic. Let's see it does appear that you have a coarsening of the idea of resurrection partly for evidential needs. They saw him. This wasn't against the Gnostics again, because the Gnostics claimed to have all kinds of visions of Jesus all the time. Like, can you top this? And the various of the apocalypses of James and others, Jesus comes back to earth. The Gnostics thought that Jesus remained, one source says, on earth after the resurrection, not for a crummy 40 days, but for 11 years. And some said a year and a half, and so on. Why did they do that? Well, for the same reason Luke makes it 40 days. It's to provide a blank check to make room for the teaching that people wanted Jesus to have given during the resurrection period. The veil is taken down, and he can tell you the real stuff, as he says he's going to do in the Gospel of John. And so they, of course, just put their doctrine in. And we know they did, because in one of them, the dialogue of the Savior, which is kind of a press conference with the disciples, what about this? What do we have to do to evade the archons, and so on and so on? We also have in the Nag Hammadi text I believe it's the Epistle of Eugnostos, the Blessed, and it's the same text, and you can see that whoever edited the thing into the dialogue of the Savior simply snipped a copy up and spliced the answers into artificial questions. I mean, there you go. I mean, that's the kind of thing that may have happened in loads of cases. So, Irenaeus and others said, you guys are just talking out of your butt here. You don't have any basis for this. We do, because we have the authentic teaching of Jesus to the apostles, to the bishops, etc. If you believe that.
That makes me, I hate that, because I know I might as well close on this, because this is such good information. We got so much more we can do. We got more questions, but it makes me just wonder, like, what would your motivation be to say that? What made Irenaeus? If Irenaeus, let's just play a game in our head and say the guy was being honest. Let's say he really believed.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Who taught him to think that way? Like, this has been a drill. You got to wonder who started that. They had to be either deceptive or something. I mean, unless they're being honest. And then
they must have deduced it, that given what the apostles are supposed to be in the New Testament, though precious little is said, they would have been the guys who knew what Jesus said. And if they did appoint our bishops, they must have taught them that. So whatever the bishops say, that's what Jesus told the apostles. I'm sure they really thought that. So they weren't deceiving anybody.
Someone had to concoct it, because, I mean, it makes me wonder, especially if you have James, for example. He had his own sect. Let's just say he took over the sect of John the Baptist. This is totally separate from a Jesus sect, which might even be possibly separate from a Paul sect. Someone unified them and acted like they're all teaching this message that's supposedly apostolic. It's almost like pious forgery to try and create a unity of something, and I wonder when that started, is all I'm saying. So.
Well, in the New Testament period, whatever that was, but my guess is they figured this is the way it must have happened, though there was what had to be overt fictionalizing, the way Luke tells some of these stories in Acts. But we know Eusebius flat out says in his book, The Preparation for the Gospel, that it's legitimate to lie in the interests of the capital T truth. Then, the Pandora's box is wide open. One last thing I wanted to say that they never say in the scholarship. I can't help but wonder if the idea of the spiritual body is just like realized eschatology. When they say Jesus is coming back and he's going to kick the butts of the Romans and so on, and nothing happens. What did the witnesses do? What did the Adventists do? They say, oh, well, it did, but spiritually and invisibly. We just had it slightly wrong. makes you wonder if they really did, like some modern groups, think that their slain guru would come back, and they're having a vigil around the corpse and praying. But it doesn't happen. He starts to rot and to stink. And so, what do you have to say now, idiots? You said, well, he did rise from the dead, but in a spiritual body.
Right.
And so maybe it was the same thing. Maybe they started out with the claim that he's going to rise bodily. Didn't happen, so they retreated to this. Who knows? I mean, that happened with the second coming. Why not in the first one?
That's an interesting point. So if the body, let's play the game, historicity, guy came, he's got some different types of teachings, all right, obviously not strict Judaism. He comes on the scene, dies, they're expecting him to physically rise. They can't let it go. In a sense, there's cognitive dissonance.
Exactly.
At the same time, there's other reasons to suspect Platonism and other ideas are infiltrating the mindset, maybe even in the teachings of the guy who's there. And you go, God nabbit, he never meant he was going to physically rise. It's a spiritual body. And here we have the Gospel of Thomas coming on, and the disciples come to Jesus and go, when is that resurrection thing going to happen? And he says, yeah, look around. It's here. You just can't see it. It's not what you expected. That doesn't quite answer why.
Realized eschatology, in this case, limited to the resurrection of Jesus. And then you say, well, I guess we'll all arise in spiritual bodies too. What the heck? Why not? And so I wouldn't be surprised. I really don't know which is the more probable.
Right.
But given the kind of thinking that went on, and has happened, there have been a number of instances, even in modern times, of people thinking that so-and-so guru is going to get up off that deathbed, and eventually they have to give up.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if they used the same thinking, oh, he did, but...
Yeah, that's weird. I've heard multiple theories that there were Jewish burial grounds for people who died, there's different things that float around. But I wanted to last comment on Hymenaeus and Philetus, which is clearly in the New Testament canon. I found a parallel from Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, to Hymenaeus and Philetus, and that teaching that the resurrection, look around and you just can't see it, realized resurrection, I like to call it. It's there, you just don't realize it. It's actually not realized, but it is. It parallels the Hymenaeus and Philetus teaching, which many were led astray, which is weird, because here's the question I have, I think it's a logical one, and is if Hymenaeus and Philetus, according to the New Testament, are leading people astray, teaching that the resurrection had already happened, and the resurrection to be understood was a physical bodily resurrection from the dead for the saints, as the church likes to teach later, how could you trick people? This is just my question. It's probably there are holes in it if you really want to dig. But how could you tell people the resurrection from the dead happened when you can go down to Joe Cemetery and see all the graves haven't opened, nobody's gone? It's real easy to prove if Hymenaeus and Philetus are telling the truth. How could you or me go and convince people who were taught physical resurrection? We're all going to go, don't worry, you'll know when it happens. Everyone's going to know. How could you convince me that it already happened if the graves and the bodies were already there? Unless you go to Matthew and find that strange place where it plays a part. But this is not in the gospel. This is something later. So it just, you see where I'm at with that?
Yeah, I think it was Gnostic realized eschatology in a special sense. It was the belief that you were raised in baptism, which Colossians says. It doesn't just say you died with Christ, as in Romans, but now you've risen with Christ, so let your mind be on the heavenly things and all that. That's one of the big reasons for thinking whoever wrote 1 Corinthians didn't write Colossians. Well, so keep in mind the pastoral epistles also mention Marcion and Gnostics, where wink wink it says be on guard against the gnosis falsely so called, and
where is this?
At the end of one of the pastorals, I think maybe it's 2 Timothy, and then it says, actually the whole sentence is, beware of the antitheses of the gnosis, falsely so called. Marcion's big book was called The Antitheses, showing the contradictions between the Old and the New Testaments, the gods in them. In fact, I knew Jeannie Mills, who was one of the chief lieutenants of Jim Jones of the Raspberry Flavor Aid fame. And she said that she wrote up a booklet contrasting the Old and the New Testament, and Jones took credit as the author, but that was the antitheses. Marcion had done the same thing. I doubt if she knew about Marcion, but it was the same idea. Look at this. You mean to tell me this is the same God? No way. And so, yeah, that's what, we don't have a copy of his antitheses, but we know that there was one from the Church Fathers, and this one of the pastoral epistles is referring to that and mentioning gnosis, so-called, in the same breath. That's why it's also arguing against encretism, which the Acts of Paul credits to Paul. Oh yeah, and he's saying that you should, if you want to go to heaven, you better stop having sex and all of this. And it's just a real cannonade of the celibacy gospel, which in 1 Corinthians 7 is moderated, only temporarily, and don't unilaterally declare no sex and all of that. And MacDonald gets into this in The Legend and the Apostle, that's the title, The Battle for Paul in Story and Canon. What an eye-opening book. And so you can see all these groups that appeal to Paul, the Gnostics, the Marcionites, the Encratites. He gathers them all up, Polycarp, I think, in the pastorals to blast, oh, here's what Paul really thought of these nuts.